Colin Barnes helps senior people become the best they can be at work. Operating internationally with leading organizations across a range of sectors, his experience is predominantly around applying business psychology techniques to leadership challenges. Focusing particularly in the fields of leadership assessment and development, training, coaching, and connection, Colin runs the leadership and talent consultancy Vermilion Consulting. He has previously headed up the consultancy operation for a large multinational business psychology consultancy and joins me today to discuss the business of leadership challenges. Welcome to Connections Radio, Colin, and thank you for joining me today. Can you please
Thank you for having me.
begin? You're very welcome. Can you begin by telling me how long Vermilion Road Consulting has been in business?
I can indeed. So I anticipated this question and I had to look it up. So it's
It's been that long,
12
has
years,
it?
it's 12 years since we've been operating as Vermilion Road. I've been operating for the last 30 years in various guises. I started when business psychology was in its infancy. So my first job was as a graduate recruitment manager for an insurance company, which was Legal and General, actually. And the organization was starting to assess their graduate intake and assess other people, and they're using these weird techniques like psychometric tests. And I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. And I got trained in these techniques. And having been trained in these techniques, the consultancy that's designed and developed and sold those psychometric tests hired me. So then that's when I really got into the consultancy of business psychology. And in that organization, I progressed and we got into other business psychology techniques like assessment centers, development centers, coaching, as well as psychometric tests, and offered consultancy services, usually to organizations who were ahead of the curve, which generally means organizations that were large corporates, mainly UK, but some of them internationally. And having done that for a number of years and ending up managing a team of 60 psychologists who did that sort of thing, I then most of the consultancy became quite large, and most people had a lot of expertise and developed their own practices on the back of that. So I was one of those people, which is about 20 odd years ago. And I've operated in various names and various limited companies and various partnerships, sometimes on my own account, sometimes working with others in partnership. And I developed the brand Vermilion Road Consulting in 2012. So basically, I've been doing the same sort of thing for the last 25 years or so, maybe 30.
So pretty experienced then, we'd say.
I've been around the block a few times.
And I'm interested, what are the benefits to a leader and perhaps to the organization and the success of a business in doing psychometric tests, in doing assessment, leadership assessments, all the things that you offer as part of your talent and consultancy?
So the benefits are the main benefit is, let's go back a stage. The main reason that organizations do this is because they want to get the best out of their people. Why do they want to get the best out of their people? So they can make more money, usually. Yeah, so well, it depends on the organization, so that they can achieve their business objectives. So for charities and other organizations that I work with, like the United Nations, that's not about achieving the profit. It's about providing the service that's to humanity, those sorts of things. So it's the first part is getting the best out of your people. How do you get your best out of the people? By giving them the best tools. And in my early days when I was still at Legal and General, we used training courses and things like that. And some of the things that we do as psychologists are around training, learning, and development. Now, one of the things that we do within this field is assessment work. So we assess people's leadership potential and people's leadership skills. And I'll come on to what leadership means in a few minutes. But to assess those skills and abilities, what's the best way of doing that is to get people to assess them about where they are now. What are their strengths? What are their development areas? And you can do that in a number of ways and use a number of different psychological techniques to do that. So, for example, you can use what in my world is called assessment centers. where you use a variety of methods like psychometric tests, like simulation exercises, where people get to present information, where they get to interact with their colleagues, interact with people that they might work with. And you get some smarty pants psychologists like me taking notes and saying, right, okay, from that and from this and from that, we've seen that this person is strong in, for example, influencing communication, but however, their planning and their organizing and their structure needs something to be designed. And from that, it gives people the basis for a development plan for the individual. And you can apply that to teams as well. So what are the strengths of the team? What are the development areas for the teams? And from that, if people then develop their skills, they'll make better decisions and therefore be more effective in their roles and achieve their objectives more effectively. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
No, it's fine. It's fantastic. How important is it for leaders to come to a consultancy like yours and learn about their leadership styles? And also, actually, the question I really want to ask you is, can people adapt their leadership styles if they say they're weak in some areas? And is that part of your work? Do you take them through the development of improving their perhaps weaker skills?
If that wasn't the premise, then there would be no need for me to have this job. Yeah.
Mm.
So we work on the basis that people can adapt, can develop, can progress. Yeah, and it's not just in working life, people do it in their personal lives as well. And as it depends what they need to do. So for example, you might have a leader who is a manager of 6 people in a research laboratory in an oil company in the UK. This is a real example.
Mhm.
And they then get promoted, and the organization has a restructure, and they get promoted to a global role. And because they're quite good and they've got limited leadership experience, but then the organization restructures so that they now have a global role, which is now in the UK, in Australia, in Texas, and in the Middle East. And they've got 200 people. So therefore, if they don't adapt the way in which they operate, they're not going to do a
They're not
particularly
going
good
to
job.
last, are they? Mm.
They're not, no. And so therefore they need to not just adapt, but develop. So yeah, people can adapt. So did that answer your question?
Yeah,
That,
absolutely.
otherwise, I'll just go on autopilot.
No, it's fine. Please don't go on to autopilot. That would make it very dull indeed. What are some of the most common challenges from leaders you come across in your work? Perhaps, yeah, the most common sort of weaknesses you find, or we don't call them weaknesses, do we? We'll call them challenges.
Yeah. So one of them was that how do you progress from a tactical operational job to a more strategic job? And some of it is a matter of scaling up. So when people and sometimes it's a matter of things happen within organizations where the culture changes or the leadership changes or the objectives of the organization change, and people aren't particularly, this is one of the common ones, they're not particularly fond of change. And you might have heard this
Mm.
thing, well, change is the only constant is change, is what people say these days.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Yeah. And but it's you need to have, well, you need to change, don't you? I think we'll talk later about technology and how that might have affected things. So you need to adapt the way in which you operate. So that was one of the common challenges. Is stepping up is one thing, dealing with change is another, and yeah, that'll be for starters.
And from a psychological perspective, why do we struggle with change? Because I think a lot of people do, don't they? What is that?
That's a very good question. I don't know. Because it's the unknown, maybe. This isn't psychology. This is just me thinking as me. So
That's fine.
um, it's the unknown. Yeah, people like some people, not everyone, but people like to have a routine, to have a structure.
Perhaps
And
we
if
like
they
the comfort of knowing what's going on.
so in large organizations, I've found recently that people are driven by their calendars. You probably do the same, and I do to a certain extent. So they will have back-to-back meetings. I remember doing some work with BT before COVID, and they did a lot of remote working just on the phone. clearly BT. Um, and people just sat in front of their screens and they had back-to-back meetings. And I think, well, okay, well, that's fine because it gives you some structure. However, it doesn't give you any discretionary time. And
Mm,
why do people put back-to-back meetings in? Because it's easy.
yeah,
You just put your meeting in and
just
it's
click,
there.
click, click.
And, and then people wonder, so well, how do I deal with strategy? Which is the common question I get asked. And I said, how much time have you given yourself to deal with strategic things? Which is where you need to think about stuff, you need to have ideas and those sort of things. Well, I haven't got time. So yes, because you booked in meetings back to back. You're responsible for your own time, matey. I'll say to them, maybe put some time in your calendar, which is you time. So that's why I think people struggle with change because it's the unknown and they're not quite sure what to do with it, and there isn't a set procedure. And a lot of people in organizations, when large organizations in particular, are very process orientated, and so it's difficult to break away from that sometimes.
Could it be a fear of being unable to manage a change as well? So if you're doing quite well in work, you've been in your job for a few years, which is kind of almost unusual these days because a lot of people chop and change a lot, especially my generation and younger.
Mhm.
But say you're comfortable, they're suddenly restructuring, they're suddenly changing things, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, is there almost an imposter syndrome thing? I'm not going to be able to do this, or I'm not going to be able to cope with this. Could that be a reason people don't like change as well? Almost a lack of confidence in change.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm doing some work with one of the accountancy professional bodies recently, and at least two people that I spoke to. One of them was a previous president, the other one was a chief exec. They both said to me, "I think I've got imposter syndrome. How did I
Oh,
get?" And so therefore, people like to have the comfort blanket as well. And sometimes it's an incremental change. The thing with change, and it's a common thing that I get when I was doing some coaching with a guy from the UN recently who he's just been coming to a job which is new to him, but he's quite a strategic thinker. He's saying, how do I get these other people who have been in the organization for the last 25 years or so to come with me on this journey to the change that we need to make to be more effective? And there's a change management is a process that quite often we get brought into to tell people about or to coach people about or to advise people about. And there's a lot of research in change management within organizations that suggests it takes forever to do that. And what happens with a change is you can do incremental changes, and then you've got to buy people into that. So therefore, you've got to influence them. You've got to lead in a slightly different way from they're used to, and all of those sorts of things. And it takes forever because, as you pointed out, people aren't necessarily comfortable with change. But so you need to make it acceptable for them. And so, what's in it for
yeah.
me? Benefits, all of those sorts of things, and then you've got to, as the person who's managing that change, you have got to keep the momentum going because people get bored with it. So, oh, right, we've got to change. That's nice. Oh, yeah, yeah. But then you've got to reinforce the benefits because it becomes business as usual and say, right, oh, we've done that change. That's it. I've done that 2 weeks now. But no, it's a whole process to get people on board.
Do you think enough companies and corporates and businesses all over the UK, particularly, are investing enough in change management, in consultancy firms like yours, in business psychology and leadership techniques? Because the reason I ask is the recruitment industry is worth billions, right? And there's like almost this in and out and in and out. And it
Mhm.
costs businesses so much money to recruit and also to sort of hire and fire and things like this. But people often leave jobs because they don't like the culture anymore. They don't like the changes being made. They don't like could we be saving money? Could businesses be saving money? The economy be saving money on recruitment by investing more in change leadership techniques?
Not necessarily change in leadership techniques, and it's not just me who does this. Quite a few people do this. You don't need to be a psychologist to do this sort of stuff. You get people who are leaders in organizations who do it themselves. A lot of organizations, particularly big ones, have learning and development departments to help with all of this. And people are generally interested in developing themselves. Right. That's one thing. Going back to your point about recruitment, can we do it more effectively? So one of the reasons that business psychology techniques like psychometric tests and assessments became very popular is to improve the selection processes within organizations to make them more efficient. Because what you really want to do is you get people whose skills fit the profile of the organization they want to work for, and also get them to work for organizations that they want to work for as well. So if you nip that in the bud and use more sophisticated objective selection techniques, like using a psychometric test, like having structured interviews in an objective way, and having criteria against which you're assessing people, then you're more likely to get the people who are going to fit the job. And if you get the people who are going to fit the job, they're more likely to not leave or and want to develop themselves, and therefore you can make that selection process more efficient. And that became very popular in well, it was in Margaret Thatcher's day, when a lot of organisations were having huge graduate intakes, and they were saying, "How do we manage this so we get the right people?" And that's when they started coming to people like the consultancy that I worked for at the time, and said, "Maybe we can use that to sift the people that are going to be most appropriate, to assess them against objective methods, as opposed to the traditional method, which was to say, well, they seem like a nice person, don't they? We'll recruit them. But have they got the skills for the job? So if you can test the skills for the job, then you're more likely to get the right people. So an example of that is there's a huge increase in intakes for chartered accountancy firms. So KPMG, Touche Ross, as it was called at the time, and a few of Deloitte's, there's another one, Ernst & Young. They used to recruit huge amounts of graduates, and they wanted to get the best people. How do you get the best people? Well, you want to get the best people who are going to become chartered accountants. How do you become a chartered accountant? You've got to pass loads of exams, most of which are numerical. So why don't we just give them a numerical test, psychometric test of numerical ability? And if you score over a certain amount, they're the ones who are likely to get in, because they're the ones who are likely to pass the exams. So that's an example of how you can make the recruitment process more efficient. Now, that was in the olden days, when people are more likely to develop their careers within one organization or within one profession. And as you pointed out, it's probably completely different now, because
Bit different,
you've got
yeah.
the Gen Z stuff going on.
It's all
So,
portfolio careers now, isn't it?
yeah,
Well, not all. I think some people still like the security and the sort of building themselves up in one company and things like that. I think there's some people like that still out there. There must be.
yeah. Yeah, and sometimes that you get people do it the other way around. So one of my kids, actually, he's basically he's been doing English tutoring. He's been around the world. He's done bits of this, bits of that. And so only last week he said, "Right, I'm going to apply for a proper job now. I just want to get some stability into."
Yeah. And it's another way of doing it now, I think, with portfolio careers and things like, I mean, I've got a bit of a portfolio career, but then I've been running my own business since I was about 19. So, but then I had corporate roles on the side of that and built up my experience. And I think now some people are doing it that way and kind of going like this. And then they
Mhm.
go in for a director role when they're in their late 30s or 40s or something. Once they've built up all their experience, they go in further up. They don't start at the bottom and work their way up. And I think that is something that's possible now that I'm not sure it was before. I don't know. What do you think?
It wasn't. I agree with you. I don't think it was as much before,
Hmm.
because the traditional route in these large corporates and the accountancy firms and the oil companies was very much focused on, even if you had something different, they'd still bring you in at graduate level.
Yeah,
Yeah, bring,
yeah.
uh, uh,
Test you out on the lower responsibility
yeah,
roles first, because it's very important in companies like that, isn't it? That it's right every time.
that's
They've got.
that's what the environment was like. And I think the environment's different now, because there are people like you who not, I'm not saying you're old, but it's getting into your 30s, say, and
I'm getting quite old,
and
yeah.
then you'll get a critical mass of people who've done that, so that it becomes the norm, or more acceptable anyway.
I'm interested. We mentioned technology earlier. You work internationally. How has the advancement of technology helped you do this? And is it a different working landscape now to how it was when you first started sort of 30 years ago?
Right. Is it a different working landscape? Yeah, to a certain extent. So, but people are still the same generally,
Mm.
and so that's similar. So and the techniques are quite similar. You might do them using technology. So that's a change. What's an example? So I worked. I told you about an oil company where you had that globalization. So this is before COVID, and so I used to do some. A lot of organizations have a in traditional way that this organization had a progression at leadership um, seniority levels. So you have a supervisor, a team leader, a leader of community, and an executive leader. So at the time when people were going to get to this stage in their careers, what would happen is they go through an assessment with me or someone like me, and we do this all this stuff around finding out their strengths and development needs, giving them a bit of coaching, those sorts of things. And we used to do that in the olden days, face to face in London or wherever.
Mm.
And now with that, because of two things. One of them because of course they had when people got to a certain level, their roles became more global, and therefore they could be anywhere in the world. And yeah, on Zoom and Teams weren't there at the time, but there were other ways of doing this type of interface. WebEx, for example, is one thing that this particular organization used. And so I've been using this sort of forum for the last sort of 10 years or so.
Mm.
Uh, and
Yeah, I
then
think
with
people don't realize it didn't appear in COVID. It's remote working and doing things online and doing things face to face meetings over video has been going for at least 10 years, actually, because the technology's been
more, I think
there.
that's more than that, yeah. And
Mm,
it's only because of COVID that people were forced to adopt it
mm,
because a lot of people were shying away from it. Now, so I so before COVID, so I've given that example of the oil company, but for other organizations, what I used to do was to go face to face with people in London or elsewhere around the world. You know, I used to do a lot of international travel, proper physical international travel, and then that ceased to exist in 2020. And we had virtual forums. So we'd do group team development activities, and we'd have various breakout rooms and all of that. And I still do that to a certain extent now. Some organizations, however, have gone back to saying, well, we're a bit uncomfortable with this. When we were forced to do it, when we were forced to do it because of COVID, it was okay, but it's still not the same. It's still not the same as doing it face to face because we can't see the whites of their eyes and all of that, particularly in the Middle Eastern culture. So a couple of organizations I've worked with recently have said, no, we're not having this anymore. We're going to fly you over to Dubai or to Saudi or wherever, and we're going to do it face to face. And they've done that. And I've seen the opposite, where people who are used to doing it face to face have been doing interactions like this in this type of forum, and they were a bit wary of it, a bit skeptical, and they said, "Well, actually, it's not too bad. We can actually do this. It's a lot more convenient. It's a lot cheaper, and yeah, and logistically, it works perfectly well. Although sometimes, if you're dealing with let's get the time zones the right way around. If you're dealing with the Far East, you've got to get up quite early in the morning because of the time distance.
And now it says on your website that you combine psychology with a degree of pragmatic realism. Can you explain this for me?
Uh, yeah, I'm a real person. I haven't got a clue. It's I'm your man in the street. I don't tend to use technical terms unless I have to, and I don't like to blind people with science. So it's quite simple, really.
Yeah.
The stuff behind it, but what does it mean to you? And so some of my colleagues, some of my colleagues will have, we discussed this earlier, have an interview script, and they will stick with it and say, "Can you tell me about a time you did that?" And then we'll ask the next question, and then we'll ask the next question. And my approach is to say, well, if you can, if you can make connections with people and get them on your side, it's much easier to get the best out of them. Yeah, in terms of the information that you want to get, in terms of getting them to buy in to any suggestions that you might have, and also you can have a real interaction rather than be seen as somebody who's doing something to you. So we're
Yeah.
working in partnership with the individual or the team or the organization.
And do you use psychology techniques to connect with people, or do you just use your humanity to connect with people?
I think, well, I'm not sure how much humanity I've got, but all amount of humanity that I have got, I will use to connect with people at a personal level. So, for example, I was talking to somebody in Geneva who, yeah, virtual Geneva, of course, who worked for one of the United Nations agencies. And he wanted to do some coaching around because he likes being coached. And I said,
Some people do.
well, I just like to grow and develop and all that. And we talked about not psychological technique, but a management technique called the GROW model, GROW, which is goal, reality, options, and willingness to do stuff. And it's quite a well-established technique. But it sounds a bit dry.
Mm.
And I said, what do you do in your spare time? He said, you know what? I've just started learning to play the saxophone. I said, oh, have you? Brilliant. And he said, I'm really loving it. And we use that grow model about and to illustrate how it could be used in practice. So he was learning to play the saxophone. What was his goal? So what he wants to do is at whatever level of proficiency by a particular time. So that was his goal. Where is he now? He's a bit rubbish, to be honest. Now his admission. And what are his options? What he could do? Well, I could practice more. I could have some more lessons. I could go out, which is what he did. He said, he's a religious guy. And he said, yeah, what I've done is I've gone to my local church and I've tried to do concerts with the band there, and just to help and to practice. And that's what I've been willing to do as well. Some people will say, well, okay, well, I can play a couple of notes, and that's all I'm willing to do because all I want to do is to entertain my family. But his willingness was more than that, and we can have a nice little chat about music as well.
Mm.
So yeah, so that's what I mean by dealing with people at a personal level and having some degree of connection.
Colin Barnes, thank you for joining me on the Business of Leadership Challenges today. I'm afraid we are out of time. It's been lovely to chat. Where can we find you online or get in touch for consultancy services?
The website is called Vermilion Road Consulting. And the website is www.vermilionroad.co.uk.
Fantastic.
Um,
Vermilionroad.co.uk. Once again, Colin, thank you.
Vermilion with one L, by the way.
Say that again.
Vermilion with one L.
1L Vermilion. Great. Well, thank you. And we'll put that in the show notes. So thank you once again. Have a lovely day.
And you. Good to speak to you, Wizzi.